There's a CNN report. Business Insider has also reported on this. The Moscow Times also reported on this from an unidentified NATO source, saying that the Russian casualties are 5 times higher than Ukrainian casualties in Bakhmut. Hey Richard, how's it going?
It's going well. Unfortunately, for some reason, when Discord calls happen, for some reason it doesn't ring. I need to fix that.
Okay.
Because I'm always left guessing, you know? How are you doing? You're going back to Ukraine, right?
Yeah, I'm in Germany right now. I had a schnitzel for the first time today, so that was a culturally enriching experience. And next I'm going to be headed towards Austria, then Poland, then Ukraine. Then when I get back in Ukraine, the plan is to hopefully film with IED crews, interview people, get back into the groove of things.
All right, that sounds good. I mean, listen, I've been to Germany as well, been to Berlin, and you've eaten all there is to eat in Germany. It's just schnitzel.
Is that
like
it? Is there anything else that I should eat?
I honestly, I mean, there's sauerkraut, but I wouldn't recommend it. It's just kind of shit. Like out of Germany isn't known for its amazing food. Sorry to all the Germans in chat, but still, there's some nice places to see in Germany and in Austria. I've been to Austria as well. I've been to Innsbruck, but I have not been to I have not been to Poland. I need to go to Poland. I have a crazy friend there that I want to party with at some point.
So I just want to ask though, what about the sausages? I would imagine the sausages are quite good.
Oh yeah, well that's a fair point. I was thinking more
immediately
like
immediately lost
meal.
the debate. Immediately.
Debate lost. Richard Hannay destroyed the marketplace of ideas.
I've destroyed another fake historian. So I have you on today because I want to talk to you about Bakhmut, because the situation in Bakhmut getting very, 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 very interesting. So before we talk about any of that though, can you introduce yourself to people? Who are you? What do you do? And what's your favorite ice cream?
Okay, so I am Richard Hannay, also known as George. That's my first name. There aren't that many Richards in Greece, you can understand. I've got a degree in military history, and I'm doing my master's in international relations. And I have a big-ish, very tiny actually, Twitter account where I basically nowadays mostly do commentary on the war in Ukraine and just a bunch of politics. And I have a Twitch stream. You can say hi to my one viewer right now. There's going to be a few more. You usually average around 10, 15 people. It's intimate, but we all like talk a bit about Ukraine, answer questions, stuff like that.
Fantastic. You didn't answer your favorite ice cream.
My favorite ice cream, salt caramel.
Easy. Salt caramel. Ooh.
Yeah, so good. I used to be like a plain chocolate fan, but salt caramel has won me over, I'm pretty sure.
Got you. I'm a big mint chocolate chip guy. I like mint chocolate chip. Okay, so the situation in Bakhmut is getting extremely interesting. This battle has been going on, if you include the fighting on the outskirts, for about 7 months. It's been going on for a while. The more intense fighting has been going on since late last year. We're now on March 8th. Everybody would have thought that Bakhmut would have fallen by now. For those of you who don't know what Bakhmut is, for the few of you who haven't been paying attention, Bakhmut is a city in eastern Ukraine. It is in the Donetsk Oblast, and it is being fought over between the Ukrainian military and the Russian military. The Russians want to capture it. For what reason, Richard?
So, well, part of the reason why they want to capture it, it is one of the major crossroads in the region. So, out of the big crossroads in all that area are like Pokrovsk, then there's the Sloviansk, Kramatorsk, Konstantinivka line, which is their eventual goal. And Bakhmut is one of those other big crossroads, and it is on the way to Sloviansk and Kramatorsk. Really, it's not the end goal. Bakhmut is an obstacle. And then there's one more obstacle, and then there's the Sloviansk-Kramatorsk line. Yeah, so like Bakhmut is the gate to the heights that are the gate to Sloviansk and Kramatorsk, because there's still Chasiv Yar ahead of the Russians, even if they take Bakhmut. If you want, I can turn on my camera.
It's okay. We can talk. I'm showing the maps on screen right now as we talk about it.
Of course.
So I have talked about Bakhmut as a stepping stone, that it's not extremely in and of itself strategically important. When the Russians capture this, they're not really getting anything outside of probably now, after 7 months of fighting so much propaganda out of it, a propaganda victory. And a stepping stone forward to taking more important locations like Kramatorsk and any other locations that they want to take in Donetsk. But it, of course, has garnered extreme propaganda significance. So the fighting has been going on for about 7 months. If we include the outskirts, the Russians want to capture it as a stepping stone, but they've been having a lot of trouble, haven't they, Richard? Why are they having so much trouble capturing Bakhmut after so much time?
So, well, there is, of course, so something about this war, right? When it started out, the Ukrainians had a pretty big superiority in numbers. But nowadays, there's a rough parity at the front in terms of numbers. And when you have a rough parity at the front, it's not very easy to just assault a city. So the Russians have had pretty bloody direct assaults, especially in the industrial zone that was on the east of town. And all that fighting didn't really get them anywhere. So they decided to kind of go around the city. But for most of the time, the flanks of the city were protected by two major locations. So there was Soledar in the north that protected the flank, and Yakovlivka protecting Soledar. And then on the south, there was Klishivka and the fortifications around it. And protecting Klishivka, there were the heights around Kudrymovka. So because there were these strong points, essentially, these locations protecting the flanks of Bakhmut, the direct assaults into the city being fruitless, the Russians decided to take the strongholds one by one. They started with Kudrymovka, and they took Kudrymovka after a certain amount of fighting, and then they moved to close in on Klishivka. They took Yakovlivka in order to be able to take the high ground around Soledar, which it was what enabled their pushing the Ukrainian army out of Soledar. So securing the flanks was what they needed to do to take the city, and they've slowly been doing that. And I think now we're probably at the most major crossroads in the defense of the city, because there are really no more defensive positions around the city to take. The Ukrainians are back to the final points. There is literally nothing else in the flanks of Bakhmut to be protected. They need to be there to keep the road open. Otherwise, it's going to be way too difficult to either withdraw or fight back. And
to be clear, when you talk about the road, there used to be multiple roads in the Bakhmut, but as the battles went on, more and more roads were either captured by the Russians or bombarded to complete uselessness by the Russians. The one that's still open is H32, if I'm correct.
Let me open my map just a moment. I have a custom map.
And I know some of the stuff is just coming through the forest, like through more dirt roads that aren't more official, but of course that's not sustainable in and of itself.
So are you looking at the map?
Yeah, I'm looking at the map.
So the Chasiv Yar Homova road, if you see, that was the main road after the Russians approached Ivanivske and made the road from Konstantinivka useless. The Ukrainians blew the bridge that connected the T504 road to Konstantinivka. So now the Ukrainians were only using the road from Chasiv Yar, especially since, the north of town, the northern suburbs around Paraskovivka, Blechivka, now those places are taken by the Russians, so they can't use the Sloviansk road. So that was the road that was being used, but now that road isn't usable either, because the Russians are around 1 to 2 kilometers from it, which means that they can use mortars. So when a road is in mortar range, you really should not be using it. The Ukrainians, I've seen some videos of them making runs, but I think that the primary traffic does not actually move through the 0506 road, which is the Homova road. I think they actually there is a dirt track that moves south just outside of Chasev Yar, and it moves into Ivanivske. And from Ivanivske, there is another paved road that leads again towards Homovec. I don't know if you can see it. Do you want me to share my screen to show that?
It's okay. We've got a big map up right here. So you're saying that there's basically dirt roads that are helping to keep, as we was talking about earlier, people going through the forest and stuff going on, less official roads, is keeping Bakhmut alive.
Yeah, there isn't a major paved highway right now that is usable. And you know how there was all this talk about a withdrawal a couple of weeks ago, but then
to be clear for people watching, there was talk of the Ukrainian military withdrawing because the situation has gotten less and less sustainable and more difficult for them. And American officials have been suggesting to Ukraine for months that they should be withdrawing.
Yeah, and honestly, I completely understood once the major roads became unusable, the threat of encirclement became very great. They were deciding to leave, and that made sense to me. But now the Ukrainians have said that they will stay in the city at all cost, and that to me means one of three things. Number one, the Ukrainians are withdrawing covertly and just messaging that they will stay in the city. The Russians did a very similar thing when it came to Kherson and the withdrawal there. Remember, like it was, we're staying in Kherson, no withdrawal, what are you talking about? And then they were gone in a day or two. It was a very, very quick withdrawal, and basically they used that rhetoric to cover their withdrawal. Number two, which really worries me, is that the Ukrainians had begun withdrawing units, but found it way too difficult to withdraw in good order because of the roads being, first of all, under artillery fire, and some of the major roads being under a mortar fire, especially with the spring mud starting to turn the dirt tracks into a slog. They might have figured out that it's too difficult to withdraw, so they prepared some kind of counterattack to happen and basically free the city by attacking the northern pincer of the Russian encirclement. And then the third thing is that, all hope is lost, kind of, but I don't think that is the case. They might know something that we don't. And yeah, it's not an easy situation at all. Even a cursory look at the map will tell you. But I think that the prospect of a Ukrainian counterattack is really interesting. It isn't impossible, especially as long as the Ukrainians have positions around Dubovo-Vasilivka. They could mount some kind of attack coming down from Sloviansk, the Sloviansk road, but it wouldn't really trap any Russian units, but it would save the city if they manage to push back that pincer all the way to the Bakhmutske river. It's not an easy thing, in my opinion. I mean, the Russians would see it coming. It's a very dense front. There is a lot of units there. It wouldn't go missed, a Ukrainian buildup there. So I don't consider it an easy thing, but I consider it plausible. What, in my opinion, is most likely is that they are saying that they are staying in while quietly withdrawing units and preparing for a big dash out of the city, if that is possible. Because honestly, they got it close to the wire with this one. I'll be real. I was expecting them to leave once Paraskovivka fell. 3 months ago, I made a Bakhmut video discussing this, and I said that, well, with Klishivka falling in the south, now the southern pincer of the Russians is complete. I think that they will push from Solidar and try to take the northern suburbs, which they did. And I said that once the northern suburbs are gone, like Paraskovivka, specifically in Blahodatne, I thought that, okay, the Ukrainians would have to leave at that point, but they didn't. They stayed in. And part of it has to do with the significance that has been put on Bakhmut, but I don't think that symbolism is as big a deal. It is a big deal, but I think the Ukrainians are weighing their military options. So it is a very, I don't know, very confusing situation, but it is really interesting to see.
I do want to emphasize that the point you said earlier, and I've tried to say this with any cursory commentary I've given. I'm not a military expert, and I don't have access to the information that the Ukrainian high command does. They could have information that we don't, about something that we have no idea about, something that we're not even considering when we're making this analysis. We're doing this available, we're doing this analysis completely based off of what is publicly available and the little bit that we do know that is being made public. I do tend to agree with the idea that I don't think the Ukrainians are going to, you know, fall on the sword here. I don't think the Ukrainian high command is making some commitment. Like you said, the third option was like all is lost. I highly doubt that the Ukrainian high command is just like, we shall sacrifice the 5th division or whatever is left in Bakhmut in order to just take down as many Russians as possible. They will go down in glory. It just wouldn't make any sense, especially since they are going to need to conduct further counteroffensives in the future if they wish to take back the rest of the Zaporozhye Oblast, liberate locations like Mariupol. They're going to need soldiers. They're going to need troops, battle-hardened troops, which Bakhmut is full of.
Yeah, of course. I don't think that I don't think that the first option of the Ukrainians would be hold at all costs. Doesn't matter if we get encircled. Those men will die, you know, for the glory of whatever. I don't think the Ukrainians are operating that way. Sometimes it is a real fear when you're conducting military operations where, I don't know, you know how somebody's like is like doing something, like say they're trying to replace a lamp and they're standing on a table. And they're like, I got it. And everybody's like saying, hey, like, you know, like it's a bit unstable. But the other person is thinking, okay, I got it. I still got it. I can do it. And, you know, 50%, 60, 70% of the time they'll get it. They'll screw in the lamp. It'll be fine. But there is that one chance that something might break and you'll fall over and break your bones. The thing with, I don't know, that was a bit labored. But what I'm trying to say is that war is about, a lot of the time is about risk, especially operations like this. So the Ukrainians took an increasingly bigger risk by staying longer in the hopes that they would, one, inflict casualties on the Russians, that two, they might run out of steam and allow for potentially restoring the front. Three, there is a certain propaganda value to Bakhmut holding and holding back the Russians, this small town in Donbass becoming a symbol of Ukrainian resistance, like Mariupol had, for example. Even though militarily holding Mariupol ended up being impossible after a certain amount of time, the Ukrainians held out as long as they could. The thing is, though, with taking risks like this, is that you can miscalculate. You can be the best commander with the best intentions, and you can still miscalculate. I don't really know. I can't tell you if the Ukrainians have miscalculated here. I believe, personally, that they are considering a withdrawal. But staying in at the moment, it would be either one, because they can't leave, or two, because they think that leaving won't be necessary because they can relieve the city. That's my opinion, because otherwise, if things continue as they are unsustainable. The Russians have mentioned that there is Ukrainian buildup in the flanks, but that could mean both that the Ukrainians are preparing to counterattack and also that they are shoring up the flanks so that they can leave safely. So it
So
can
that
be
could be
either
either
of those
option.
things.
So it could go
Yeah,
either way. Okay. So I
yeah,
want
that's the way I see it.
before we talk about that, because I've also seen the reports of Ukrainian soldiers, more Ukrainian reinforcements being sent to the region to perform some task. What that task will be, we'll see in the coming days. But I wanted to ask you about the goals of defending Bakhmut, because the Battle of Bakhmut has been going on for a very long time now, much longer than I think most people anticipated. And so that first goal, I think, is the one that interests me the most right now. That idea of like taking down as many Russians as possible, seeing how much damage they can do to the oncoming Russian army, so that maybe they punch themselves out. Do you think that Bakhmut has properly served that purpose when it comes to from a military standpoint? Do you think they have um, taken down a lot of Russians in the process from the data that you've seen?
So I believe that they've achieved a couple of things. First of all, I think that the Wagners will no longer be able to use prisoner soldiers in a great extent.
Haven't they stopped prison recruitment?
They have stopped prison recruitment, but that doesn't mean much. Because from what I understand, the Russians are preparing to, instead of giving them to Wagner, preparing Strafniki, battalions. Which, if you know what Strafnikis are, is they're basically penal battalions. So units in the regular Russian army that are comprised of prisoners who are to gain their freedom upon achieving whatever task. Penal battalions did serve to a great extent in World War II on basically most sides. And yeah, sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad. But I think that that Wagner itself has taken quite a few casualties.
I do have to say, because this immediately came to my mind, I would have to think that part of the reason why this is being done is due to the constant infighting between, the Russian Ministry of Defense, Shoigu, and Prigozhin with the Wagner Group. That this infighting back and forth, because if it sounds like the Russian Ministry of Defense basically saying, "Wow, this has been very successful for them." Yoink. That's what it sounds like.
Yeah, so part of it is definitely that, because I've seen a lot of the infighting between Prigozhin and the other types in the Ministry of Defense. Prigozhin saying that they aren't giving him shells, but it's weird. It almost has a theater vibe to it, if you know what I mean, because the Prigozhin, like a few weeks ago, said, "Oh, they sent us artillery finally," and I don't think that it would be like, "Oh yeah, one day you don't have artillery, day two, oh suddenly I have artillery." Something is weird about it. I don't know.
Yeah, Prigozhin has been complaining on social media time and time again about how he's not getting artillery and it's causing all of his troops to die. Now, I don't think he says it's political, that they're in the storehouses, that they could have them at any point, and they're just not giving to them. I think it's probably a combination of shell hunger and politics. I think it's probably both of these things compounding on each other to produce a bad shell outcome for the Wagner Group. But the Wagner Group has been taking a few L's recently, and it has been it feels like they're taking out their frustrations on the Russian Ministry of Defense. I don't know if you saw this video that was circulating. If somebody in the chat could link it, I would really appreciate it. Of Wagner soldiers like shooting images of people in the Russian Ministry and Defense for propaganda videos. Like, it's like the infighting has gotten pretty intense. Do you think that the infighting between the Wagner Group and the Russian Ministry of Defense has undermined their ability to take the city and has slowed it down?
I think that the major reason why the progress around the city has slowed down, particularly in the last 2 weeks, because they were moving pretty fast, has to do with, one, Wagner tiring out to a certain extent, but two, the arrival of Ukrainian reinforcements definitely slowed them down, which goes back to the other two things that we were saying. But I do think infighting has an issue here, because it isn't only Wagner fighting in and around Bakhmut. There's also regular Russian units. There's VTV. There's a bunch of people fighting on the Russian side around Bakhmut. The Wagners have done a really good job trying to portray themselves as being the only ones fighting around there. And definitely the artillery brigades of the Russian army are probably kind of pissed at that, because let's be real, like the Wagners wouldn't really be moving anywhere without the superiority in numbers and weight of Russian artillery. It isn't like it used to be, not like in July, especially because with HIMARS, I think, isn't it HIMARS or HIMARS, right?
I don't think it matters. I say HIMARS.
Yeah, whatever. Basically what that system did is it made it really hard for the Russians to concentrate their shells, which made it really hard to do huge fire missions, like 60,000 shells in a day. That's not possible anymore for the Russians. They're still maintaining a fairly comfortable superiority in the amount of artillery they're firing over the Ukrainians, but it's not as devastating anymore. The Ukrainians have ways of dealing with it.
I believe I just saw a report where that the Ukrainians are firing about 100,000 shells a day, according to the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense.
100? Wait, no.
Was it 100,000? I could have sworn it was 100,000. But they wanted
100,000 a day.
No. Sorry, not a day. They're doing like 100,000 a month or something along those lines, and they want it to be 250,000.
Yeah, I mean the Ukrainians want to build up, but that will depend on Western aid because really Ukraine is not in a position to produce that many artillery munitions. So it is really up to the US, and right now. It'll have to be a procurement from multiple partners of the US and other countries because the US has expended 1/3 of its stock in Ukraine. So right now they're not producing fast enough to replace Ukrainian losses on their own, the Americans. So it'll have to be pretty much everybody else pitching in. Something specifically that you said before as to casualties. I think that the Russians have taken at least 2-1 or 3-1 casualties around Bakhmut, but that's just a guess. People saying 10-1, 15-1, that's kind of ridiculous. It's way too much. And let's be fair, it hasn't really been an easy battle for Ukraine either, specifically because of Russian artillery. If the Russians were attacking without artillery, it would have been a turkey shoot. But because of Russian artillery, what happens is if an assault fails, on a trench system or on a certain position in a tree line, the Russian artillery will be called upon to fire on it for a long time until basically the Ukrainian infantry decides to withdraw or is killed. It's not an easy environment to fight in. And the city gave a certain amount of refuge to Ukrainian infantrymen. So that's why attacking the city is harder. Artillery, you need much more artillery to flatten a city than you need to flatten a tree line. Mm-hmm. So moving around the city is easier, path of least resistance. And that's why it hasn't been the easiest fight. It hasn't been devastating for the Ukrainians, I don't think. A lot of Russian propagandists say that, they broke the back of the Ukrainian army in Bakhmut. I don't think that's the case.
No, when they say stuff like that, they're just trying to find a bigger victory and more meaning to all the carnage than there really is. Yeah.
Something that Zelensky said, which was a little surprising.
Wait, before I move on to Zelensky, I do want to say that there's a CNN report, Business Insider has also reported on this, the Moscow Times also reported on this, from an unidentified NATO source saying that the Russian casualties are 5 times higher than Ukrainian casualties in Bakhmut. I don't know if I buy that because number one, it's a NATO source, and number two, it's an unidentified NATO source, even if it's coming from Business Insider and CNN, which are usually reputable outlets. But this is the type of stuff we have to go on when it comes to casualty numbers, because there is no, here's the Ukrainian number of how many died today. Here's evidence for all of it. Here's the Russian. That doesn't happen. A lot of this is a propaganda game, whether we like it or not, when we're talking about these militaries that are in Ukraine's mind fighting for survival and in Russia's mind fighting for the survival of the regime and for Russian nationalism, the conquest of Ukraine. So you're not going to get straight numbers from really either side, even if I do tend to think that Ukraine is more accurate, even if I still don't think it's 100% accurate.
Yeah, Ukraine does not really report on its casualties at all. It reports on Russian casualties, but those are definitely exaggerated. And it's not something I fault the Ukrainians for. I mean, it's part of the information war is part of the real war. So never have I seen a Ministry of Defense report accurately on losses. That happens after the war is over. Then you can report on losses, however way you like. But specifically talking to casualties, from what I've seen is that people think that overall in the war, Russia has lost more, but not a lot more, not like 5 times more than Ukraine. People, you know how Mark Milley said either side has lost 100,000 casualties. He said it in passing, sure, but a lot of analysts kind of tend to agree with him in terms of saying, oh, there's probably 100-some thousand casualties on the Russian side. There's probably like 80, 90,000 on the Ukrainian side. I think they're running roughly at a 1 to 1.5 ratio. And
Ukraine being the 1 and Russia being the 1.5?
Yeah, Russia being the 1.5. And that's mainly because of Russia's artillery. If they could take that away in Russia's Air Force, they could probably equalize fairly quickly, if not come out on a much better, much better trading situation. But I'm a bit pessimistic when it comes to casualties and longevity, because looking back at history as well, casualties won't break armies in the scale that we're talking about. They won't break armies with 100,000 casualties a year. Even going back to World War I, right? People kept comparing Russia to the Russian Empire, right? How it collapsed in 1917, and people saying, "Oh, Russia will have another 1917." What I like to remind people is that in between 1915 and 1914 and 1917, the years that Russia fought in the First World War, the Russians were going in to defend Serbia. They weren't going in, it was kind of spurious. I don't know how much the Russian people cared about the territorial integrity of Serbia, but it wasn't that big a deal. And still, Russia managed to lose around 6 million casualties before it actually collapsed. And I'm looking at wars like the Iran-Iraq war, right? Both dictatorial regimes, the Ayatollah in Iran and Saddam Hussein in Iraq, fighting a war for 8 years with basically no movement in the front line. Trench warfare, hundreds of thousands of casualties. I guess it was some like million casualties on each side, with 500,000 dead, some crazy thing like that. And both regimes stayed there. I unfortunately believe that it won't be casualties that break the Russian army. I think it will be a maneuver victory, which becomes less and less likely as time goes on because of Russian fortifications in Zaporizhia. That's why I wanted Ukraine on the offensive as early as spring, and that's why I wanted Western partners to start giving tanks earlier. It's a rough situation.
When you talk about Zaporozhye, what you're specifically saying is that, or what you're referencing is the fact that in a lot of areas, like for example, Kramatorsk, and locations like this, fortifications have been built over the last 8 years, 9 years of fighting. Right? Mm-hmm. These are locations that have been prepared to possibly be combat zones for a very long time. Same is true in areas like the city of Donetsk, where the Russians have built up a lot of defenses in territories that they've captured over the last 8 and 9 years of their like proxy war in Ukraine through the LPR. Even though it's not really a proxy war, but they're sending their own soldiers. But putting all that aside, the Zaporozhye front line, I've been to it. It's a lot of wide open fields, a lot of them. And there's not a lot of fortifications on it. There's some that have been built up since the start of this war, but not 8 years of buildup like other parts of the front line. And so, seeing that it's quite a large front line, the Zaporozhye front line, a lot of people are saying that this would be a smart location for the Ukrainians to counterattack while the fortifications are not as strong as they could be in the future, because if they get stronger, then it's going to be a lot harder for the Ukrainians to take back territory. But that's also true in the inverse as well, that as the longer this goes on, it'll probably be harder for the Russians to take Ukrainian fortifications that are continuing to be built up. When I was in Kramatorsk, even though it was built up over 8-9 years, I was still seeing trenches being dug. I was still seeing fortifications being made. Obviously, I can't get into detail, but I was seeing that they're constantly adding to the defenses to make that place a fortress, which it is.
Yeah. Here's the thing. You're absolutely right. Zaporizhia is the place to attack for Ukraine. Donetsk is way too fortified. The north around Luhansk has a different problem. The main problem with the Luhansk front line, especially where they're fighting now around Kremina and Svatove, that area, the main problem is that its roads are running parallel to the front line, not horizontal to it, meaning that it's not very easy. You need to push across fields and streams, and you don't have that many roads to push with. So it is a difficult for different reasons. But
A lot of
Zaporizhia
they would have to do a lot of like off-road assaults, basically.
yeah, exactly. But Zaporizhia has the roads. The Ukrainians have the positions to attack out of. Okhrikiv is a perfect position to prepare attacks from. The thing is, over the past 9 months or so, the Russians have built an impressive network of fortifications around Tokmak, around certain. They've built a lot of belts of defenses going all the way back to Melitopol, and that worries me. I don't know if you saw. There was a tweet by Ukraine battle
Okay,
map.
wait. Are you talking about the Cope trenches tweet where
the Cope
where the
trenches.
Russians are digging trenches and he calls them Cope trench? I don't know what's a Cope trench. It's a trench. It's been around for a while, but they work for a reason.
Yeah, and that's what I was gonna say is that the fortifications that the Russians are building, essentially, what it is, it's a tank ditch followed by a minefield with barbed wire, and behind that is the trench line where the infantry sits with ATGMs. So when you are faced with that, there's two ways to overcome it: either overwhelming artillery fire or an air force. Ukraine is not getting an air force anytime soon. It would take years, many years, for a Ukrainian air force to be able to contest the Russian air defense network and the Russian air force in the air. So Ukraine needs to get a lot of artillery, a lot of anti-air assets, so that they can prevent the Russian Air Force from responding, and they need to get tanks. Those are the things that you can use as breakthrough weapons, but it will be very difficult. As time goes on, especially now with the spring mud, the Ukrainians will likely have to postpone this attack until the summer. And
I'm sorry, can you say that last part again? Can you say that last part again?
What I was saying is that how far back? The
summer.
The summer. So basically the spring mud is around right now, so it's not the best time to attack because the Ukrainians don't have like an overwhelming numbers advantage. So they can't crush the front line with their numbers. They don't have the tanks ready. It's muddy. I don't think that a major spring offensive is in play. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't. It will take a couple of months, maybe a bit more, for the Leopards and the Challengers and all the other Western tanks to arrive. Though it is pretty good that they got the Polish T-72s and PT-91s. Those are fairly easy for Ukraine to integrate. Maybe they have 1 or 2 extra brigades ready to go on offensive operations in Zaporizhia. But honestly, I think that they will be fully ready to go on the attack in the summer. But there is a big problem here. It's a dilemma. The longer they wait, the more fortified the line is. But if they shoot off prematurely and the offensive fails because it's not powerful enough, that could seriously cripple Ukraine's ability in the long term to mount new offensives. So it's not like Kherson. It's not like Kharkiv was. Now the front is so much more dense and so much more well fortified. My fear with this war is that it will not end or continue like in a disappointing fashion where it's basically a stalemate. And Ukraine really needs to break the line in Zaporizhia for that to be avoided. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, I just see it ending like Korea, basically.
Is there anything to be said about the idea of the West upping artillery production, Japan, South Korea, these other nations that have capacity that we're not exploiting to its fullest potential, increasing artillery capacity, and that possibly exceeding what the Russians could do, or getting close to it to a point where they could really push them back here in the near future?
I think that, yeah, if all the Western partners and Western producers of artillery go back to full productions or increasing production, they could bring parity to the Russians. They could allow Ukraine to fight in a more equal footing in the artillery war. It's a problem of coordination and of the industrialization that has taken place since the Cold War. Basically, Western analysts did not expect a major war in Europe to be taking place, which is you could say it's a gap. I can't say. I haven't been running in analyst circles that long, given that I'm like 20, 22, 23. But it's basically they have to start producing more. It's not like a question now. They really need to start coordinating, getting their stuff together, and producing more. Giving more tanks. That fortunately, they don't need to start producing that many new tanks. I believe that the US has plenty and their partners have plenty that they could give. But what worries me is that there'll be some kind of war wariness, not in the US, but mainly in Europe. And there might be problems with.
Wait. Can you explain why you're not concerned about the United States?
I believe that as long as the Democrats win in 2024, or actually what I should say is that until 2024, the elections then, I'm not worried about the US. I believe that Biden will stick to it and provide whatever he can. The only problem would be if Trump won, or whoever, DeSantis, I don't know who it would be, fighting against Biden. I believe that the US would basically end its support. But that is if the war lasts that long.
I don't know if DeSantis would end the support. I don't know. I think in my mind, Biden's the best option. DeSantis is like, it's a coin flip kind of for him in my mind, because he's kind of like signaling towards like withdrawing support. But he's also not saying he doesn't support Ukraine. He says he supports Ukraine, but he's like, I only supported it. He views it in a very realist framework. Like, Ukraine's kind of like a pawn in the American game, and as long as we get out of them what we want, then like, who cares about like Ukraine winning the war, quote unquote. Where Biden seems to have more of an idealist outlook on this war, where Trump is just like, I'm just going to give the Russians what they want, and then we're leaving. Yeah. That's what it sounds like from him.
So yeah, until 2024, I'm not worried about the. We're talking in a scenario of a stalemate here. Is how would the West respond to a stalemate and trying to produce more to break it? I'm worried about Germany, France, countries like that that have more volatile politics, and also I believe that the Germans, sure, they're supporting Ukraine, but I think they might be looking for excuses as well to go back to normal. I'm worried about the West, but that's I'm worried about Europe, but that's, I guess, has to be because I'm also like in Europe. It's my playground. But yeah, I believe that if the Americans, if DeSantis or Trump won, especially if Trump won, this war would be lost. So
let me ask one more question about artillery production. Let's bring it back to Bakhmut.
Sure.
Do you see the West making the correct moves necessary in order to meet the artillery shell need that Ukraine currently has? And what other weapons could be provided to Ukraine that could be helpful for them achieving this goal?
So I do see them. I believe that it is possible. I believe that this path to victory is clear. The steps are clear, and if the Western leaders take it, it is going to happen. The equipment that Ukraine needs are anti-aircraft systems, because if the anti-aircraft screen wanes and the Russian Air Force gains air superiority, this war will become much more difficult to win. So number one is anti-aircraft systems. Number two is artillery, infantry fighting vehicles, and tanks. So those are the weapons that the Ukrainians need to break through Russian lines. So those are the main things that people should be the West should be providing to Ukraine. People that talk about planes, I think, are misguided. It will take. They should begin the process of getting new jets to Ukraine maybe after the war.
Well, wait.
But
When you say it's misguided, are you talking about like the F-15
F-16, yeah,
F-16 stuff? Well, and because if somebody has MiG-29 fighter jets they give Ukraine, that would obviously be helpful right now.
I think that I don't want any budget that goes towards Ukraine to be dedicated to planes that would become effective in maybe a year or two and would never be there in adequate numbers to actually make a difference. Because if getting, say, 50 F-16s to Ukraine wouldn't change anything. The anti-aircraft screen of the Russians is insane right now, and the Russian Air Force boasts thousands of planes, so it wouldn't make a huge difference. And I think that whatever budget is allocated towards Ukraine should be maximized to the things that would make a difference as soon as possible and to the greatest possible extent. And that's the thing, planes are expensive and air forces take a ridiculous amount of time to build up. So much more than artillery arms or tank fleets or new armored brigades. I think this war needs to be won on the ground, not on the air. As long as the Ukrainians keep their anti-aircraft screen up and the air contested, the Russians can't leverage their air force. The Ukrainians have that problem tenfold. They cannot leverage their air force because it's tiny and because the Russian anti-aircraft screen is much, much broader than the Ukrainian one. So as long as they can keep the air contested, the war can be won on the ground. That's basically the bottom line. What was I saying about Western leaders or something? I was saying something about...
You were just saying that if Western leaders have a path forward, they just need to have the will to basically, increase production.
Yeah, so they do have a path forward, and yeah, that's what I was trying to say. I've said this before a couple of times, but it should be really stressed that this war cannot be won without Western aid. If Western aid was cut off, Ukraine would have 2-3 months perhaps of intense fighting until they run out of ammunition. So it is very, very important that Western aid needs to stay consistent and stay effective in order for this war to be won. And that's why Ukraine depends on its Western partners. And I believe that is why we shouldn't, constantly, we shouldn't portray the Russians as like an enemy that is not threatening anymore. Like, oh, just buffoons with shovels going forward with nothing. Basically, they are left with nothing. I believe that people should. Well,
to be clear though, it is funny to see 80-year-old naval guns placed on 70-year-old armored.
Oh yeah, that's funny as shit. Don't get me wrong. That was the funniest shit I've seen all week. Oh my god, I don't even know what those are gonna be used for. They can, like, those things, if you drive around in that thing for long enough, it'll ruin the suspension. That vehicle is so badly balanced, it's impossible. They are cartoon villains. Like, they are very funny. Don't get me wrong, like, the way they're fighting this war is completely ass backwards. But the problem is that they are still there, and they are still a major threat to Ukraine, and people should realize that and make sure to pressure their governments to assist Ukraine to the greatest extent possible. If people think that the Russians aren't a threat, people won't care to do everything in their power to assist Ukraine. They'll say, oh, whatever, Ukraine will handle it. Ukraine will win, no matter what. And I don't think that's the case. I think that the Russians are still a major threat, and should be taken seriously in that regard, not in any other regard, like fucking their propaganda, their vehicles, their situation as the second greatest power on planet Earth.
Yeah, do you believe they are the second most powerful military on the planet?
I mean, I think they're probably like third now, behind China. The thing is, like, it's not like
morally corrupt.
They still have certain advantages that they had before this war started, like their production base, manpower base, reserve base, their equipment stocks. They still have a lot of those advantages. Their air force. But yeah, I wouldn't call them number two. I think they're still number three. It just makes you think just how much further that number one spot is for the United States. It is just that the US is just that much more powerful than its competitors. It's just the US stretched thin. That's the problem the US has in terms of its power, is that if the big war that these two fight maybe against China, it wouldn't be on American soil. It would be in China's backyard. That's why that war would be difficult. But that's besides the point. That's a whole different discussion. If you ever want to talk about Taiwan, I would have to educate myself a bit more. But it would be a fun convo, I think.
I do want to. We've gotten very off track from Bakhmut, but I do want to ask that as this war has gone on, we've seen more and more MacGyvering. We've seen MacGyvering of tourniquets recently, because the old Soviet rubber tourniquets have been falling apart. We've seen MacGyvering of vehicles like that. Like, I don't know what this thing is even, like, I don't know the purpose of it. I don't know what this thing is meant to do. We have seen a lot more and more old Soviet equipment. I mean, this naval gun on top of this vehicle right here went into service in 1945. Like, that's when they started using this. This is very old equipment. As the war goes on, are we going to see more and more and more stuff like this? Or do you think we're basically seeing what we're going to see for the rest of the war?
So I think that something that Perun said, I don't know if you watch Perun, but he's an excellent Australian.
Yeah, he's great. He's the only person that makes me care about PowerPoints. Yeah. Run.
Yeah. Honestly, the man's a legend. But basically, as he said, is that as this war goes on, what you're most likely to see is a greater disparity between equipment in the Russian army, where shittier equipment is pulled out of stocks and given to shittier units, while better equipment that is newly produced, because Russia does have a production base, will be given to better units to keep them fighting and active. So I think that they're like the stuff that is average will probably whittle down. The stuff that is in stocks will whittle down, but I don't think that it would ever really end, if you know what I mean. It wouldn't ever come the time where the Russians would open the warehouse and say, "Oh shit, there's no more whatever, like no more tank tracks." I don't think it would work like that. Their capacity to go on offensives will diminish if they continue taking L's like in Vuhledar.
Okay, going to Volodar. We're getting back to Bakhmut, because Volodar is Volodar is an actually strategically important location. So Volodar is south of Bakhmut. If it was captured, it would open up a lot more areas that they could attack into the north, up towards the Bakhmut direction. But can you tell us about what happened at Volodar a little bit, about why it happened like it happened, the prospects for the Russians in the future in this location?
So the thing with Vuhledar is that like that poor naval brigade that the Russians put there, like it's not a fun place to attack in Vuhledar. I don't think it's just such an advantageous position for the Ukrainians. They have, first of all, Vuhledar is on a hill. Second of all, there's basically no other settlements around it that can provide easy cover to assault Vuhledar. So it's not like Soledar, which was on the lower ground. And so it is on the high ground, and it is basically a block of apartment blocks. So it doesn't have wide suburbs that you can use as cover to attack the main line. It's just the blocks. So it is basically a fortress as the fortresses of old, a big bailey, if you will. So it was never an easy location to assault, and then the Russians went at it in an ass backwards way. They attacked with armored formations in lines and run into Ukrainian minefields and ATGMs. I don't know. I think that it is not an impossible place to take, but the Russians would have to gain a local superiority much, much greater than what they've been using to take it. What? One brigade? That's not enough. They might need 3 or 4 brigades, perhaps, to go on the offensive. Enough numbers can solve most problems in war, but I don't think that like they would be able to take it anytime soon, especially with the videos that we've seen, the amount of equipment they've lost there. I think that which brigade is it? What's the name of that brigade? I'm forgetting now. But I think that the Russian brigade that's been going on the offensive there is basically like done.
So can you, okay, so for those of you who don't know what happened in Volodar, they tried to do a massive kind of armor assault at the location. It did not go well. It ended with from what we have visually confirmed, not talking about damaged vehicles the Russians were able to get back, or people who were able to like waddle back to their original starting point. But over 30 vehicles seem to have been destroyed or disabled. A lot of people were killed when they tried to assault Volodar. This is due to a lot of factors. The Ukrainians had pre-calculated their artillery, so they were able to just start firing. They had drones monitoring the assault that was going on. That's why we have a lot of footage of this. I think I might actually pull up the Volodar footage in a second and show you guys. And the Russians just, I mean, I'm going to be blunt. They just kept running into mines. Like a vehicle would run into a mine, then another vehicle would go around it, and they'd hit another mine. I mean, it was kind of it was an embarrassment. It was honestly embarrassing for the Russians.
Slaughter. Yep. Yeah, they tried a bunch of times to use whatever little cover that existed around Vuhledar to attack it. It's just those dachas, basically those small houses in the east of Vuhledar that they tried to storm a bunch of times. But basically, that place is eviscerated. It doesn't exist anymore. It's flat and open. So narrow attacks on Vuhledar, I believe, will fail. They might try to go around it, but I think they'll give up on Vuhledar for now. I think that once Bakhmut is gone, which I think that it's like I'm mostly of the opinion that the Ukrainians are withdrawing covertly. But I think that for the Russians, the goal after Bakhmut will either be a dash towards Chasiv Yar to try to take it quickly so that they have a big stepping stone on the line of hills in front of Kramatorsk and Sloviansk, or they will try to focus on Avdiivka, because I don't know if you've seen, Avdiivka is a huge fortress for Ukraine in front of Donetsk, and has stood for many, many years, but the Russians have to a certain extent been creating the same kind of pocket that they have in Bakhmut. Their southern pincer has been doing way worse than their northern one. Yeah, I think that they will either go for Chasiv Yar or they'll try to slowly surround Avdiivka, maybe send Wagners there. I don't know what they'll do. But yeah, it's going to be an interesting few months.
I will say you missed some expert analysis, you hack. Okay, what if all these burning wrecks were making the cover in live time? Like maybe if they have enough bodies leading up to Volodar, they can use the bodies of their comrades as cover. Hold their dead comrades in front of them as they run into Volodar. Have you thought about that?
You are right. If you use enough tanks as basically like a conga line of burnt wrecks, you could use them as cover to advance infantry. So, like if we get enough tanks, let's say like 150 tanks, and put them in a line, they could probably, if they're all destroyed and sitting burning there in front of Volodar, they could provide enough support and cover to the Russian conscriptovich to attack through and outside of those tanks, and then get gunned down in the last 50 meters by some machine gunner that's sitting in a commie block in Vuhledar. No, honestly, like the attack on Vuhledar was embarrassing. Just like from a military standpoint, I mean, what are they doing? So, seriously, Jesus.
Back to Bakhmut. You were talking about the mud season and how the mud season is arriving. It has arrived. It's getting muddy. Does that at all put the Ukrainians in a better position to defend Bakhmut if they were to attempt to hold it, if they were to attempt to keep it, or do a counteroffensive and then try to hold their position?
The mud season does two things. It makes generally attacking more sluggish, so it could slow down the Russian progress around Bakhmut, but it would also mean that the avenues of attack that the Ukrainians have would become a bit more limited to a more major attack from the north and the northwest. So from Sloviansk and perhaps Siversk, trying to pressure the flanks of Bakhmut. I think the south is not really possible. The southern flank is much more secure for the Russians, much less vulnerable. There's the other problem that whatever dirt roads that the Ukrainians can use to supply Bakhmut would become unusable after a few drives over them, because dirt roads, and their main problem is that if you're going to use them for heavy traffic, they tend to degrade, and if it gets muddy, if they get rained on, they'll turn into completely impassable slogs. So they need to be using paved roads, and there are no paved roads that are safe that lead into Bakhmut right now, none. So that's the main problem with defending Bakhmut, is that the mud season makes it really makes it much harder to supply the city. So that's my main worry when it comes to defending Bakhmut, and that's why I think that the Ukrainians are in the process of withdrawing.
Is there any last thoughts you would want to give on Bakhmut?
Personally, I think that it has been a tremendous defense by the Ukrainians. I didn't believe that the city would last this long.
Burns is an immoral, morally corrupt,
but
bankrupt
they've managed to whittle down this war to Herculean efforts for something that, the Soviet Union would laugh at back in the day when it was attacking. Because maybe, what was it, 80, 90 years ago, during this same time, in 1943, 44, the Soviets would be capturing huge swaths of Ukraine during their campaign there, in their counterattack. So the Ukrainians have seriously slowed down the war, and I believe they've secured their survival. I think that Bakhmut is a testament to that, how a small city has lasted for this long. But I think that Ukraine should be really careful and sensible as to how they're withdrawing or staying there. I trust them to take that risk. I trust their advisors and their intelligence on how they're handling this. But yeah, they should be considering now all their options and how to move forward when it comes to Bakhmut, because honestly, Bakhmut is not the most important defensive position in Donbass. It's Chasiv Yar. Chasiv Yar is more important, and the line running from Chasiv Yar all the way to the north, that there is this canal that's running there, and there are these hills. That is all the way down to Toretsk. That area is super important for keeping Sloviansk, Kramatorsk, and Konstantinivka safe. So yeah, that's all I have to say, really.
Thank you so much for coming on and talking to us today about Bakhmut. Where can people find you?
You can find me. Do you want me to send you? I've sent you my links. You can find me on Twitter at Richard Hannay 17, or you can search Richard Hannay and you should be able to find me. And twitch.tv/Richie Hannay. Maybe I can post them in the chat. Actually, I can't. I have sent them in Discord to you. You can post them in chat. I don't have chat open because I have my viewers. You can say hi to them too.
Hello, Richard viewers.
Yeah, of course. Most of them are probably your viewers as well. Being real. But yeah, you can find me on Twitter and on Twitch. On Twitch, I don't stream that often because I'm doing my masters, but I tweet quite a bit, which I should stop. Twitter is not a good place. I see a lot of takes there that make me mad.
You want a motivation to stop looking at Twitter? I googled. I just googled Twitter the other day. I don't know why, and it came up as a micro blogging service. You're a micro blogger, Richard.
Oh no!
You're a micro blogger, not even a blogger, a micro blogger.
No, that actually gives me pause there. A micro blogger.
A micro blogger.
I would never introduce myself as, hi, I'm George, a micro blogger.
A micro blogger. I could not think of a less substantive contribution to society than saying, I'm not even a blogger, I'm a micro blogger.
Oh, Jesus. Yeah, thank you for that one. It will give me pause. I'll keep posting about Ukraine and about politics, though, because that stuff interests me. But once I get through my masters, I'll finally just kick back, relax, retire, just get out of public life for 5 years or so, and then get to work or something. I don't know.
Being outside of the public eye couldn't be me.
Yeah, I mean, good luck. You're going back to Ukraine. I'm looking forward to seeing more footage from there. I've enjoyed your documentaries.
Thank you. Did you see my video I released today?
Oh, I have not. I should, but
I have a video on my main channel. Everybody listening should go watch it too. About how the Russian military is getting blown up by meme bombs deployed by the Ukrainians that have had custom messages written on them by donors around the world. It's very interesting. It's helped raise a lot of money for the Ukrainian military, and it raised an interesting moral quandary about the commercialization of violence. I really hope people go check it out.
Oh, that's really interesting. I've seen the meme bombs. There have been quite a few creative messages. I also saw the one from Adam something that
got him in a little bit of trouble. I included that in my video. I made sure to include it in my video. It's really, I'm really proud of it. It's a good piece. And I went to central Ukraine. I went to Cherkasy to interview the people behind it too. So we got some on the ground interviews in there. It's a good piece.
Cool. Thank you for having me on. And anytime you want to talk, if you pass by the Netherlands again, I'm not in Amsterdam. Damn, I need to go see Rose Wrist since I'm in the Netherlands, because I got real jealous when I saw the picture where they kept making you bigger.
They kept making me bigger. I was gigantic by the end of it. They kept editing me.
The first photoshopped image was the real one, not the real original one. When I saw the real original one, I said, "Okay, actually now he looks normal. It doesn't look like a Hagrid, Still,
I did look like Hagrid in that photo.
It would. One time I'll come to America. Okay, I want to see the culture there. I want to go to maybe the South and also the New York, places like that. Completely different places in America, but sure, yeah. Anyway, I had a good time, and I believe we'll talk again in the future.
Thanks, man. I'm glad to have you on anytime. You have a good one, Richard. See you later.
Right. See you later. Bye.
Bye. Don't I look gigantic in this photo? There were so many people who saw this photo and were like, and treated it like it was serious. So I posted a photo of me visiting with like just me visiting with Loner Box and Rose Wrist right here. Here's the original photo. I look, people have called me a lot of things in this photo. Some people say I look like a Mongol Khan about to raid and pillage a village. Other people say I look like Hagrid from Harry Potter, and I'm with Harry Potter and gang right here, Harry Potter and Weasley. But my editor for my main channel, High Progressive, he edited it to make me like bigger, and people kept sharing this around thinking this was real. People were treating me as if I was like a giant. And High Progressive keeps releasing pictures of me edited to be bigger and bigger. And so people who follow High Progressive just think I'm gigantic. And he doesn't say they're edited. See, this is posted tallest European versus shortest Americoid. And boom, people just believed it. Great. It was fantastic. Also, did you notice this? Look at this. Look how Rose Wrist is holding his hands. What is he doing here? What is this? Is this a gang sign? I have no clue what he's doing here. It's wild stuff.